Hello and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I get together and basically go over the week's events in the Church of Scientology and what's going on around that, as reported on Tony's Substack. Hey, Tony, welcome back.
Hello, Chris. Good to be back.
Yes, and another week of shenanigans. First off, Grant Cardone. Just because it's just so ridiculous. This is just why I wanted to start with this. It's because it's so stupid. What was this story with his tweet and controlling the weather? What was this about?
Yeah, Grant's something. I refer to him as a professional ham hock because he's this Pied Piper who uses social media to convince people he can make them rich, and he's just like the quintessential Scientologist, and he's very popular, makes a lot of money, and donates a lot of money to the Church of Scientology. But that doesn't mean he's all that bright, right? Because this week, in after a hurricane had gone by and had resulted in record high storm surge in Tampa Bay, another hurricane, Hurricane Milton, was coming right at them, and we had a few days to prepare for this and talk about this. And it looked like it was just going to be a bullseye in Tampa Bay. It ended up being a little bit farther south, but there's still a lot of damage. And that's two big hurricanes going by in the space of about a week and a half. It's just amazing. And so some people were questioning it. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Georgia congresswoman, said that they control the weather with the vague they. And that brought a lot of attention. Like, come on, lady, it's not the way hurricanes work. But then Grant really stepped in it, because the thing about Hurricane Milton is it was forming in the area of the Yucatan and then was heading east towards Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And in a tweet, Grant Cardone says, I grew up on the Gulf and I don't remember ever seeing a hurricane do this. Could it be the government? And it was just, he was just lambasted by people all over the place about how ludicrous it is to suggest that the government's creating category 5 hurricanes and directing them. It's just insane. But on top of that, I had personal knowledge that he was wrong. And that was back in 2005. I was the editor in chief of New Times Broward Palm Beach, and I lived in Fort Lauderdale. And I certainly remember Hurricane Wilma that spent some time beating up the Yucatan, built up power, and then came flying across the Gulf from west to east as one of the most powerful Atlantic hurricanes of all time. And we were on the opposite coast. It hit the west coast of Florida, came across Florida very fast, traveling very fast. I didn't have power for a week. I'll never forget sitting in the kitchen in my apartment with the sound like the entire building was going to get knocked down every few seconds. It was so scary. Got through it. Didn't have power for a week. But I'll never forget that was Hurricane Wilma. It was 2005, and it definitely came from west to east. And in fact, I even brought up their two tracks on my Substack to show that they were almost identical. So Grant Cardone, even though he apparently lived there his whole life, may not remember Hurricane Wilma, but I certainly do. And there are many other storms that did that as well. So, he just brought a lot of attention on himself. And of course, a lot of people understand that he's this figure in Scientology. So one of the responses he got was, well, is Xenu making it happen?
Right. Yeah, she didn't say who they were, did she? Right. So Marjorie, I don't know. I mean, obviously it's whack, just like flat earth and all of that. And I've addressed these things many times on my channel. In fact, if you're curious about that, I got a whole thing.
Well, as soon as you express any skepticism, people start sending you links about the government talking about controlling the weather. And yes, there have been some experiments with seeding clouds to increase snowfall a little bit.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
No, they're not cooking up category 5 hurricanes and deciding which states that get hit. I mean, it's just insane. So, but he really stepped in it and did Scientology proud, I think.
Well, I think so too. And actually, I'm going to connect the dots even more because I met Grant Cardone right after he got clear and was on his way onto the OT levels. I was there and worked with him in the course room and stuff. And he is not a tall guy.
Right.
And in fact, I'm going to say physically and presence wise, he's the closest thing I have ever run into to David Miscavige. And I've met both of them and been in the same space for periods of time. So, and Scientology is laden with conspiracy theories, exactly like what Grant threw out there. There's a lot of Scientologists who believe exactly that. And maybe all the way up to David Miscavige, because he certainly never puts the kibosh on any of it. So just as a point.
Well, and it's not just current Scientologists. I mean, in my social media feeds, the people who are spreading the most misinformation about the rescue efforts, which Republican governors and Republican congresspeople have been saying has been excellent in those states, like North Carolina's governor, the people spreading the most misinformation and saying that FEMA's spent all its money on immigrants instead, and there's no money and nobody's getting any supplies. All the people I see doing that are all ex-Scientologists. So I mean, it's
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow. Well, I guess as I've said many times, right? A lot of those bad habits in our thinking don't just go away because you change your beliefs in Xenu.
yeah.
And unfortunately, through the indie movement and through the X movement, we see a lot of this conspiracy thinking. We just do. It's something that we work on addressing. Actually, at least I try to. Okay, let's move on here. You had another story, and this was something that sparked a little bit of conversation, sort of in the community, but it doesn't look like there's a whole lot here. Tell me, the Lisa Marie memoir and connections with Scientology. What was the story here?
Yeah, so Riley Keough, Lisa Marie's daughter, explained that just about a month before Lisa died, she had told her daughter that she was struggling trying to do this autobiography or memoir or whatever, and would Riley help? And so after Lisa sadly died in January 2023, Riley did her best to kind of finish it and complete the project. And there's some wonderful stuff in it. I mean, you can't help just being enormously sympathetic to Lisa, to Riley, not so much to Priscilla. She doesn't come off too good in this book. But that they've dealt with so much tragedy. I mean, not only Lisa Marie seeing her father die when she was only 9, but then Riley losing her mother and her brother in the space of just a couple of years. So a lot of tragedy in this book and some really wonderful insight into who they were and growing up. But of course, I'm interested in the Scientology because, there was a very big part of Lisa Marie's life. And of course, she had a really interesting exit from Scientology, just a vivid, experience where she went to Flag in October 2014. She was angry about the way Dave was treating Ron Miscavige, his father. She wanted to have a showdown with him. Dave chickened out and sent his sisters. And there's just this scene of Lisa Marie sitting there while Denise and Lori are screaming at her. And this is at the Flag Land Base in Clearwater, and she just left out there and said, "That's it. I'm completely done." And I know this because she told it to me, and she told it to Mike Rinder, and she told it to Ron Miscavige.
Mm-hmm.
So we know this happened. In fact, one of my favorite anecdotes from this whole thing is that after they left the Flag Land Base, Riley and Lisa went back to Nashville where they were staying, and Lisa called Mike and was telling Mike about this whole terrible experience. And then Mike said she put Riley on the phone, and Mike had never spoken to Riley Keough ever. And he said the very first thing he heard from Riley Keough were the words, "You need to take these motherfuckers down." Okay. So that's pretty significant that Lisa Marie Presley had a showdown at the Flag Land Base in October 2014 and then said that to Mike Rinder and then talked to me about it a year later.
Yeah.
And none of it's in the book. And, another thing Lisa told me was that, she not only loved Michael Jackson, but that it was Scientology that forced her to divorce him. And it was David Miscavige using the Scientology attorney, John Cole. And that Cole was the one who called her up one day and said, Michael Jackson's going to file. You need to file first. There's this idea in law that whoever is the first to file, say, a divorce, it tends to have a slight advantage over the other side. And so, she said, this is what they told me, that Michael Jackson's about to file for divorce. You need to file first. And so she did. And she instantly regretted it. And in the book, Riley changes it to, somebody told my mother that Michael was going to file. And so she needed to file first. No, we know who it was. It was John
Right.
Cole. Why not? So I don't know if it was just they were afraid of being sued by people. They also, for example, another thing that has nothing to do with Scientology really is that the final years of Lisa's life, sadly, were largely consumed with fighting her ex-husband, Michael Lockwood, in this terrible custody battle. There's not one word about that in this book. And maybe Lisa would have left it out. I don't know. I don't know what Lisa would have put in. I don't know what Riley decided to put in. I don't know what the lawyers decided could or could not be in. But I just felt that it was worth taking. I took out every passage that mentioned Scientology and then explained what was missing. So, another thing, Chris, you certainly remember is 2 years ago, Lisa Marie Presley was being asked to testify in the Danny Masterson trial because she had personal knowledge that Scientology had told her to talk Jane Doe 1 out of going to the police.
That's right.
And
Huge
Judge Olmedo decided that was better for the civil case and not the criminal case. She didn't get to testify. I mean, come on, that should have been a whole chapter in that book. Is the fact that her attorney was worried she'd be facing obstruction of justice charges.
That's right.
I mean, it's major stuff, and I don't know. I don't know. I'm sure everyone has an opinion about why it's not in there, but and again, I'll say again, there's some wonderful stuff in that book, particularly the first chapter, and some real insights into them. But it is odd that Riley has kept out so much Scientology, and then she uses Scientology phrases here and there in the book.
That's kind of where my mind goes, is did they get her back? And didn't we, am I remembering right, did we have a conversation about Riley?
I think we've talked about this before. So in 2015, Lisa told me that she was out and that she had told Riley and Priscilla they need to be out too, because she needed them to watch her back. And that when I was speaking to her, she was adamant all three of them were out. Well, since then, we've seen Priscilla do some things that suggest she might be back in. She's been hanging out with Gottfried Helmwein, for example, in Austria. When they did that movie about her by Sofia Coppola, they filmed an interview with her as sort of extra material, and it sure looks like she's actually wearing a Scientology pendant around her neck in that interview.
Right.
So I don't know. It just seems like Priscilla's back in. As far as Riley's concerned, few years ago, I noticed that one of my readers brought to my attention that she was starting to appear on Instagram again with Scientology friends, and so that's not great. But the probably the most troubling evidence is right there in the book when she's using Scientology phrases and she's kept Scientology out of the book. And again, maybe Lisa would have too, but it's troubling.
Yeah, it is, because it tells me in pretty clear terms from my point of view that she's been either recovered or at least handled, quote unquote, to, keep quiet. And that pressure could sensibly would most logically come from Priscilla. And I think we've established pretty well that she's back in, because you don't do what she's doing if you're not. So seems like a recovery, as they call it in Scientology. I used to do these things. Seems like a recovery has happened. And that's very sad, because Lisa did get them out, and then Scientology snookered them back in. Okay. There was a mention on something that happened with the forced marriage lawsuit.
Yeah. So Leah's lawsuits on appeal, the Bixler lawsuit, the Danny Masterson civil lawsuits on appeal. So really the only thing happening right now is the Jane Doe 1 lawsuit, where she's alleging that she was forced to marry the SEAL recruiter. And so she considers any of the sex in the relationship to be non-consensual. And she's basically suing Scientology for negligence, for forcing her to do that. And there's several challenges to that lawsuit right now. Scientology's really starting to hit back hard. And one of the things is they're saying she should use her real name. She's named the SEAL recruiter. She's named her husband, her ex-husband. Why shouldn't she be named? And so Megan Kuniff was nice enough to go down to court and send me her notes. And she described it that this judge was torn. I mean, I would kind of think it was a slam dunk. It's like, look, it's alleging sexual assault and sexual assault of technically a minor. I mean, I think she was 17 and a half or something.
Mm,
But it's alleging sexual assault of a minor. It's alleging sexual misconduct. Of course, you're going to keep her name private if she wants to. I don't know. It just seemed to me like a given.
yeah.
But the judge admitted he was very close to making the decision to force her to use her name, but he ultimately sided with her. So that was kind of scary. Um, but and then so going forward, the important thing in that case is, if you remember, Scientology did what it always does. They found a contract she had signed and said, "Oh, you signed a contract with us, and therefore you can't sue us. You have to go to arbitration instead." But her judge in that case had written this incredibly great ruling, tentative ruling, saying that nope, Scientology's arbitration system is inherently unfair. But David Miscavige was able to get in the next morning and remove that judge before the judge could make it final. So that's hanging over this case because she's got a new judge. Is that judge going to see the same thing? And so Scientology is doing everything it can to throw stuff at that judge to say, you got to consider this, you got to consider that. So that's going to be going on for some time yet.
Right. Okay, cool. So we'll just kind of check back in on that one as it progresses. Okay, now this is always an interesting one. Periodically, you'll get the lists of donors from Scientology. And what was the story this week on this?
Well, another Impact magazine came out. That's my favorite Scientology magazine because that's where they celebrate the whales, we call them, the big donors, the people who not only give money to the IAS, the membership organization, but get special awards, their statuses for the more money they give. So if you give $1 million, you're now gold meritorious. And if you can get to 2.5 million, then you're platinum meritorious. They turn it into kind of a game. So I always find that funny. And this was interesting timing because the annual IAS gala is less than 2 weeks away. And that's when they really put on the biggest party for these donors. They call it the IAS Patrons Ball. It's on Saturday night of that weekend. And that's when the biggest donors will get their big trophies. But just a couple of weeks out here, they put out a new issue with several other people that have all given million to $20 million to the IAS. And so I just always think listen, they're trying to celebrate these people. Let's celebrate them. I put their names out there and show their pictures and people then send me information about who they are and what they do and that kind of thing. So I will say this: Scientology is struggling. It is having a hard time recruiting new people. It is having a hard time staffing organizations. We know that this organization is not what it was 20 years ago. However, the one thing that has gone right for Scientology is David Miscavige is so good at getting these gigantic donations out of these wealthy people.
Mm-hmm.
He's getting more million plus donations now than he was 15 years ago. I'll tell you what that. So while everything else is going down, what's going up is that Dave is getting better and better at getting these huge donations. Now, 3 times this year, he's put out this list. So I don't know, it's pretty amazing.
It really is. And there's so much to potentially talk about with this. One thing I'll say is the Impact magazine, your favorite, certainly one of the most telling, revelatory, transparent, if you will, of Scientology's publications. There is no tax information we can get our hands on except those 1099s, which are, kind of whatever. So having a window into not only who, but how much and how often and how is it building. If somebody were to take this project on, I'm just going to throw this out there, and go through those impact magazines and database that information,
I know.
you would basically have the history of how Scientology continues to survive, because that is its financial core, is those people.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of simple. With if you pay your workers virtually nothing, you pay the government zero taxes, and you take in these gigantic donations from millionaires, you end up amassing a huge amount of money.
That's right.
And there was a short window between 2006 and 2016, I think, around there. I think it ended somewhere around there, 2017. The law changed, and even nonprofit religious organizations like Scientology had to submit a kind of tax document they'd never had to submit before for what was called other income. And the first thing on that form was book value of your organization. And so it was an incredible gold mine for a few years. RTC, CST, CSI all had to write what they thought their organization was worth, and it was billions. And then the law changed again, and they didn't have to do it anymore. But for a few, that's why on Going Clear, when Alex Gibney says, they've got like $3 billion, it was because Jeffrey Augustine and I had reported those documents.
That's right.
And it put those numbers up. And it was a brief glance we got into just how much money David Miscavige has amassed. Well, since then, since 2016, 2017, and we stopped seeing those numbers, he's only gotten better at getting big donations from people. So we know those numbers are even bigger now,
Right.
And then one other thing I like to make a point about money in Scientology is that a couple years ago, that news came out that the Mormons had this secret $100 billion fund, and people were blown away. And I was pointing out to them, it's like, yeah, that sounds like a lot of money, $100 billion, and Scientology's only got 3 or 4 billion. But hang on a second. There are legitimately 30 million Mormons in the world. So there's $100 billion fund that's been amassed from 30 million people. Scientology has $3 or $4 billion in liquid cash, and they've only got 20,000 members. There's just no question Scientology is the richest religious organization per capita on the planet. So that's, and again, why I like getting these impact magazines. And okay, let's see who the suckers are this time.
That's right.
Who forked over 10 million to Dave this time?
That's right. It's not the same names year after year after year. For a long time, it seemed like it was, but I look at them now and I'm like, I don't know most of these people, and I used to know most of the people. So,
well, and I got a question from somebody: why isn't Tom Cruise on the list? And I always have to explain that you're only in. So this particular list only covers it just came out before the IS Gala, so it's just like summer, fall 2024, whatever. You have to have reached a new status during that period to make this list. So even if you've given 15, 20, 30 million dollars, if this year you didn't give enough to quite get to that next status level, you're not going to show up on that list. That doesn't mean you're not still a Scientologist. That doesn't mean you're not still a big donor. It just means you just haven't quite crossed that next finish line yet.
Right.
So, and that's one reason. So that's one reason why somebody like Jim Bridgeforth or Jim Mathers or Tom Cummins may not be in every list because they're still working towards crossing that next level. But there's another reason why people aren't on the list, and we know this is the case, and they are asking not to be on the list. So some of the celebrities, we know that Tom Cruise has given millions and millions and millions of dollars, but he never shows up in these lists. And it's not because he hasn't crossed the next level like some of these other people. He obviously just doesn't want to be listed in there.
Exactly.
So that's why the names change. You see people come and go, but it's always interesting to see who's there.
Exactly. Cool. All right. So then another interesting story, further progress moving on the protest in the United Kingdom of the IAS event coming up. And there were some emails and some reveals here. What was this story?
Yeah, so Alex Barnes Ross is organizing another protest coming up at the IS Gala. And last year, he's done such a good job just researching the law, and he found that if you're going to put up a tent that big that's going to hold that many people at an event, 1,000 people, at least a few thousand, not as many as they say, but at least a few thousand, and you have on a tent, and that tent's going to be there for a month or something, you have to have a permit for that in England. I don't know, maybe in Texas you can do what you want, or I don't know what the law is in California or New York,
You
but
definitely have to have a permit.
In England, you cannot put up a tent that size and
Uh-huh.
hold an event that large without getting some permitting. And so Alex just called them up, and the local government said, "Did they ask for a permit?" No. So this year, he made sure well ahead of time to say, "Hey, have they submitted an application this year?" And then he did the smart thing and said, "By the way, I want copies of any emails between the Church of Scientology and the council, the district council there."
Yeah.
Formal Freedom of Information records request, and he got some and shared them with me. And what they show is that when Alex asked the local government, has Scientology applied this year, instead of responding to him, they immediately wrote to the church and said, "Hey, where's your application?" So again, it shows that these local officials they're safe pointed.
Totally.
they don't understand who they serve, and so it was interesting looking at those emails, see the kind of back and forth about the other thing Scientology is trying to do that's really kind of hinky is that they had, starting in July, they asked for a special change in the law that would create this zone around Saint Hill Manor where you can't protest.
Yeah.
It's a special exception. And the local council decided, well, we can't do that this year, but we'll make a determination for next year. So Scientology was clearly unhappy that they didn't get that this year, so they tried to go through a back door, and they pretended that they needed to close some roads in order to help people driving to the event find the proper parking lot. And so that was in these emails. And so it's fun to kind of be able to see how sneaky Scientology tries to be with government officials, and they kind of figure out what's going on. But I know that the local officials there, whether it's the East Grinstead Town Council or the Mid Sussex District Council, they really see Alex as a nuisance, and I'm just mystified by that. It suggests to me that these are sleepy towns where these officials are not used to being asked hard questions, and they are not reacting in the right way. What they should be doing is, what, we got to be open about this. We got to keep records. We need to, just when Scientology asks us a question, just treat them the way anybody else would, instead of like leaping to attention and trying to help Scientology out. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm hoping at some point they'll realize that Alex really is doing a service for them, for their constituents, and they start treating him a little better.
Yeah, for sure. It's the rubber meets the road kind of work, and it's the kind of work we need more of in the ex cult space. Is people taking on the burden of checking in, finding out, looking stuff up, really doing that work, because making noise on public media, on social media, is work. But this is the kind of work that actually really impedes their activities. And that's why it's so great. So, keep going, Alex. It's good stuff. Okay. And then finally, Hannah Whitfield had an update this week, and she is practically a legendary figure in Scientology history. What was this story?
Yeah, she's the former deputy commodore, and she was the captain of the Apollo under L. Ron Hubbard, and of course she was a really wonderful part of the movie Going Clear. And when Milton started creeping south, away from a direct hit on Tampa Bay, I mean Tampa Bay was still hit pretty hard, but when the eye was starting to creep a little bit south, more towards Sarasota and Cape Coral, somebody reminded me, Hannah's in Cape Coral. So I gave her a call just to see, are you, everything going to be okay? And she assured me that she was not in an evacuation zone. She had friends with her. They knew that their power would go out, but they figured they'd be okay. And then she said, by the way, I have some news. And she said I could let people know at my Substack. And that was, she's had a mass on her right lung for a decade, which doctors have kept an eye on, and now it's starting to grow. And so they've decided they're going to remove the top lobe on her right lung this week.
Mm.
And she's, she says that they're feeling that it's so localized that that's all they'll need to do. They won't have to be chemo or radiation. So she sounds very upbeat and optimistic, and I'm sure we're all rooting for her. And she sounded great. So it's a shame that she's going to have to. Believe me, you go through any kind of surgery like that, you're just knocked out. It's going to be a tough time for a while, but I have a feeling she's going to bounce back.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, not so great news, but a good prognosis. And we hope, obviously, for the best. Hannah's awesome.
Yeah.
I've actually worked with her in the real world, and she's just a really, really sweet person.
Yeah.
I don't get to use that word with a lot of people, but she is.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So those are the stories we're covering this week. I hope all found that interesting out there, educational, fun. Tony, do we have any sort of heads up or preview on what you're working on?
What's gonna hit this week? I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously we're in that last week and a half to IAS. And so I think we're going to be paying a lot of attention to what goes on over there. And obviously I'm going to be very interested to see who shows up, since last year Tom Cruise not only flew in, but then made such a, show of shaking people's hands. He knew that those pictures would be shared on social media. They were making a point. They were making a point because there's all these rumors always that he's leaving. So I read somewhere today that he's leaving England and he's going back to America after finishing a movie. With a tabloid press, never know if that's true, but that would be interesting timing, because does that mean he's not going to be there next week for Dave? That'd be interesting. But see, he rarely goes to these things. So if he doesn't go, it doesn't mean anything. I know if he doesn't show up to it, everybody will be saying he's leaving Scientology. No, it doesn't mean that.
No.
But we'll see who shows up.
We will. That'll be interesting. And I'm also interested from the perspective of who are they? Do they see any need to bring in a heavy hitter to glad hand with the East Grinstead council people, to sort of, put some more safe pointing there, right?
That's a great point, because they did take the mayor of East Grinstead to Tom's movie opening last summer.
That's right.
And Elizabeth Moss was at the LRH birthday party this year with John Travolta in the front row, giving David Miscavige a standing ovation, even though she was very pregnant. I don't know. I guess she must have had that baby by now, right? I haven't heard an announcement or anything, so maybe she's not up to traveling. But it'll be interesting to see if they're kind of grooming her to take the kind of spot that Tom Cruise stands in.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, we'll see what happens. As I say every week, and because it's important, right there on the screen in front of you, you see the address for Tony's Substack, which is where all this reporting happens. Check it out, subscribe, get your daily notifications, and come back and check in with us for the weekly summary on Mondays. All right, guys. See you next week. Bye-bye.